from Renaissance-style chateaux, grand country estates, architectural glass masterpieces.
These are the remarkable homes
Simply breathtaking.
and magnificent landmarks
One day, my son, all this will be yours.
at the very heart of Britain's spectacular history.
I have never seen one like this.
Join me
I need to get there with all speed. Onwards, driver.
and a host of celebrities
Oh, crikey.
with a passion for the past
Kaboom! Wish me luck.
as we travel the length and breadth of the nation
It is between the walls.
and with unparalleled behind-the-scenes access.
From the highest heights
Now I'm through my blind panic.
to the deepest depths.
We'll uncover the secrets
my goodness.
still hidden within these breathtaking buildings.
These are the places that nobody else gets to see.
And explore the riches
How spectacular.
and treasures of one of our most loved institutions.
This is an amazing story. Come on, I want to know the end. I want to know the end.
Welcome to the secrets of the National Trust. Sitting high on a Derbyshire hillside is a house of extraordinary presence. With its extravagant glass facades and 6 imposing turrets, it stands as a marvel of Elizabethan Britain.
It was the vision of an extraordinary woman who returned to the site of her childhood home after an extraordinary life.
And with the owner's initials and coronet standing proud on top of each tower, nobody could ever be in doubt as to whom this house belonged.
The awe-inspiring Hardwick Hall was home to Elizabeth Talbot, Countess of Shrewsbury, or as she was more commonly known, Bess of Hardwick.
With sheer determination and 4 well-connected marriages, Bess rose from minor gentry to become one of the most important and powerful women in 16th century England, becoming a confidant of Queen Elizabeth I and jailer to Mary, Queen of Scots.
And this house was her calling card, proclaiming from the rooftops, "I've made it."
By exploring secret hidden stairways,
It is between the walls.
exclusive penthouse dining suites,
It's another palace of glass.
and ripping revelations from family biographers,
This is an amazing story. Come on, I want to know the end. I want to know the end.
Hardwick Hall is a story of female empowerment, politics, and a fight for the throne of England itself. Also coming up,
Can you give us a hand?
Miriam O'Reilly turns the wheel of Hardwick's history
It's extraordinary.
and discovers the best thing before sliced bread.
It actually smells of toasted caramel.
Peter Purvis is at Oxburgh Hall uncovering a whiffy escape route.
It's actually underneath what would have been the loo.
Here we go.
And Jenny Bond heads down Ecton copper mines
This is what it's all about.
Wow!
to unearth how Bess's ancestors made a Big Bang fortune.
Kaboom!
But in Derbyshire, Hardwick Hall was built by the sheer willpower and determination of one woman who, despite 16th century limitations, proved to be the ultimate matriarch. To get the lowdown on Bess, I'm meeting the National Trust's Nigel Wright at the entrance to this magnificent house.
For a house that was built in the 1590s, Nigel, it looks so ridiculously modern.
It does. It was one of the first houses in the country that's symmetrical. And you can see from the front the amount of glass, which is one of the main features of this. Almost like the shard of its day, the amount of glass that was used.
Well, it's always been that saying, hasn't it? Hardwick Hall, more glass than wall.
Yes,
And was that some kind of demonstration of your status and what you could afford?
Status and wealth. Glass was one of the most expensive building materials you could use, and the biggest piece of glass you could make was about 2 inches high. So although it looks like a wall of glass, it's made up of thousands of tiny pieces of glass.
Before the luxury of glass, windows were often covered with wooden shutters. Bess of Hardwick allowed light to flood into her Elizabethan manor.
If you weren't sure that the person was wealthy because of all the glass they had, she puts her initials and her coat of arms and coronets on the top.
Yes, this was not the house of a shrinking violet. And her fourth husband was an earl, so she was a countess. So the coronet on top proclaims her status to all and sundry.
So it was basically a case of the Elizabethan version of if you've got it, flaunt it.
Definitely.
Why was it so important for her to establish her status, to keep saying, I am powerful, I am wealthy?
Part of the reason was that she was a woman. It's a bit of a cliche, but she'd made it in a man's world. She started off, she was of gentle stock, but quite low down. Each marriage, she moved a little higher up the hierarchy, as it were. Her fourth husband died. She was an extremely wealthy woman, and she just wanted everyone to know it.
She was actually born here, wasn't she?
She was born, actually, on the side of the old hall.
Just over there?
That's there.
So what you're saying is before I go in the new house, I need to go over there to the old one?
That's where the story starts, yeah.
Throughout her life, Bess was married 4 times, had 8 children, built the famous Chatsworth House, and finally became a countess, thanks to her marriage to the Earl of Shrewsbury.
Bess's rise to the top belies her more humble beginnings. Born at Hardwick in 1527, her original home was far more modest. Widowed 4 times, the first at only 16, marriage number 2 brought Bess the famous Chatsworth estate. Marriage to wealthy number 3 saw her inherit more houses, money and land, before number 4 gave her the title of Countess. She returned to Hardwick a fabulously wealthy woman, and as English heritage historian Megan Leyland explains, before building the new hall, Bess had grand plans for her old 2-up, 2-down.
In 1587, she started building. She started turning what was a relatively modest family home into a building which was suitable for her new status. Importantly, not only did she come back wealthier, she came back as a countess. So she needed a house that reflected this.
So there was a small house here. She's now replacing it with something much grander.
Yes, certainly much grander. She filled it with glass. She put wonderful plasterwork that we can see clinging onto the walls
There are
still
bits
today.
of it, astonishingly, so much for later in
The
time.
overmantels of the fireplaces. This was a really big deal for Bess. It was a big personal and financial investment to build up this home for her. And there's no coincidence that she sort of became known as Building Bess.
Can we still go in and have a look?
Yes, we can.
Gosh, it's amazing that this much has lasted, isn't it, really?
It is, isn't it?
Old Hardwick Hall was Bess's forerunner for the new hall.
This is a good Elizabethan workout, this. How many steps?
Something like 127 steps.
More than your average semi, isn't it?
Yes.
So we're heading sky high to get a privileged look where it all began.
Great views from the top of this astonishing project.
It really was, and I think Bess would have known that when she was building up, that people could have looked out across her estate, looked out across the land she owned.
Which way's Chatsworth from here?
Chatsworth's over in this direction.
So she could gaze over there and remember and round herself where she was from.
See where she'd come from.
So why did she leave?
Well, she didn't really have a choice. She was not getting on too well with her 4th husband. He had increasing debts. He was custodian of Mary, Queen of Scots, and that was a costly and very, very stressful thing to be in charge of. Bess was building at Chatsworth, spending money. She was doing OK, and you can imagine the tension that might have formed between them. And so her husband came to Chatsworth with 40 armed men and essentially chucked Bess out.
So she came over here to where she was from anyway, my neck of the
Exactly.
woods. She's building her own place for a few years, and then she's building a new place, and she can actually see it from here.
Yeah, just metres away. A second huge building project that actually went on simultaneously for a while with the hall here. They were meant to work in tandem together to house her enormous household that she would have had by this period.
So she started building this one. How soon after this is she building that?
Well, not very long at all. She was building here in 1587, and by 1590 things are starting over at the new site just metres away.
So stupendous. You think this is pretty astounding. Then you look at that and you can almost imagine Bess saying to her friends, if you think this one's good, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Adorned with Bess's initials and coronet, it proclaimed across the land her power and status. And as visitors stepped through the front door, Bess was out to impress once again. The Trust's Nigel Wright is taking me on an exclusive tour full of secret surprises.
You come into the Great Hall, and here's my coat of arms.
In case you'd forgotten, by the time you walked through the front door, there's her coat of arms and there's her coronet right on top of it. Did I mention she was a countess?
She did frequently, clearly, to everybody, several times a minute.
It was all about status, wealth.
Elizabethan power play.
Definitely.
Really. And alongside the coat of arms and all the way around the room, tapestries.
Yes. Really expensive, colourful tapestries.
Well, you see, we always tend to think of tapestries as being like these are now, which is slightly dull, muted colours. They weren't at all when they were hung, were they?
No. They were very bright colours, and the story in the tapestries, people would have known the story that was telling, but you'd have come in here and you'd reach for your sunglasses because everything was light, colourful, brash almost.
So this was their way of, I suppose, you know, the big glitz and glam, really, wasn't it?
It was. Colour meant wealth.
And Bess liked to splash the cash. In one London shopping spree alone, she spent over £40,000 in today's money on this single set of tapestries. Now that's Elizabethan bling. As you ascend the 3 floors of Hardwick, the ceilings get higher to indicate the importance of the room's occupants. Only honoured guests would rise to the lofty heights of the high great chamber on the 2nd floor. Lucky me.
We go from one gigantic room to an even more gigantic room. They just seem to get bigger and bigger and bigger. What was this one used for?
Once you'd been greeted by the Countess, you'd have actually had your meal in here. So this was actually, if you like, a very grand dining room.
How would it have been laid out?
You'd have had quite temporary tables, trestle tables really, which have been covered with fine linen. Your meal would have arrived in great procession and fanfare. Stone cold, of course, but it would have looked good.
It's come a long way.
Yes, it has, all the way up the stairs.
Now, tapestries, again, absolutely everywhere, but right around the top of the room, an enormous plaster frieze, and in the centre, a coat of arms, which is not that of Bess herself.
No, well spotted. It's the royal coat of arms.
So that's Elizabeth I's coat of arms.
Elizabeth I was one of the most powerful monarchs in British history, but unmarried and with no direct heirs, tensions about which family member would succeed her created an atmosphere of intrigue and suspicion.
So was this a sort of homage to the Queen, this room?
Very definitely. It's just showing her loyalty to that monarch. But there's actually a very specific reason why she's doing that, because one of Bess's granddaughters was called Arbella Stuart, and she actually had a claim to the English throne.
Bess had married her way up to the giddy heights of Elizabethan society, but there was one more step to the top, a royal one. So Bess instigated a marriage between her daughter Elizabeth and the royal Charles Stuart, a grandson of Henry VIII. The child of that marriage, Arbella, was Bess's granddaughter, who had a legitimate claim to the English throne.
So this is interesting. So it's to Gloriana, Elizabeth I, but you never know. My granddaughter might aspire to that one day.
It's a classic hedging my bets.
Yeah.
It was a dangerous game to play. So you've got to sort of push your own family claims at the same time, making sure that you don't do anything that's going to suggest to the existing monarch that you're in any way, shape or form disloyal.
So I've had my meal, the tables are about to be cleared away. Where do I go while all that's going on?
We'll go up onto the roof, higher still, and we'll take the leads. If you want to follow me, there's quite a secret way we can get you up there.
Oh. Right. Where do we go?
Hang on a minute, Alan. Here we go. Secret door.
Oh.
Follow me.
OK. Goodness me.
With their expensive dresses and finery, Bess's top-notch guests would have paraded up to the roof via a grand staircase, but we're going up a hidden stairwell never explored by the public.
It is in between the walls. Amazing. Look at these. This is perilous, isn't it? Right. Cool. Oh, look at that. Cooey. This is so impressive, isn't it, looking out on that? It's that classic, one day, my son, all this will be yours. Did she sort of own everything that the eye could see?
Pretty much, this was all her land.
That is astonishing. And you're right up here. There's only God higher than you are.
It's very deliberate why she stuck her house on top of the hill in North Derbyshire.
You've been in no doubt about her power from the moment you saw the building from the outside, from the moment you came into the Great Hall. You gradually made your way up the building, and finally, at the end of the evening, almost, here we are. This is why I am Bess of Hardwick and you're not, that kind of thing.
There's a bit of a theme here, isn't there?
There isn't. I'll tell you what, though, it's a long while since I had my main course. Can we have our pudding? Because that's what we've come up here.
Let's go and have our pudding.
Yeah.
Yep.
Situated atop one of the turrets is Bess's banqueting pavilion. Strictly for private members, here sumptuous food would be served.
It's another palace of glass.
Away from prying eyes and eavesdropping ears.
So they'd come up here, what would they eat?
Sweetmeats, sweet wines. Your servants will bring your tables up with all the goodies, and then your servants would disappear, most of them, and then this is when you could talk about who was going to be the next monarch, who fancied who.
Gossip. Yes. I have, however, noticed one thing. Bess's coat of arms is still higher than we are. It's endless, isn't it, really? Right up in the sky, she's
Even
there.
up here, you're not allowed to forget whose house you're in.
No, I'm very lowly. I'll go back downstairs. Come on.
Whether high or low born, between family, servants and guests, Bess had a lot of mouths to feed. As she acquired more land, expanding Hardwick Estate, she bought a stonemason's, a glassworks, and Stainsby Mill, where the grains grown in her new fields could be milled into flour. Miriam O'Reilly's venturing to the outer edges of the estate, where the big wheel at Stainsby Mill keeps on turning.
The existence of a mill at Stainsby is recorded as far back as 1216. And later on in its history, it's likely it would have produced the flour for the bread on Bess's table when she first lived at Hardwick.
To find out more about the history of Stainsby, I'm meeting the National Trust's Sandra Trig for a spot of breakfast. Fresh bread made from flour produced right here at the mill.
Oh, it cuts beautifully as well. Look at the texture of that.
It's rather dense, isn't it?
It's very different to what I'm used to. And with the flour milled here, would it have just been for bread for the big house?
It would have been for the big house and for all the people on the estate.
So it was pretty classless then. Everyone could share in the flour to make their bread.
Absolutely. The flour was the sustenance of the nation at that time, and it crossed the class divide.
But bread wasn't buttered on both sides equally. The wealthy, like Bess, would have demanded extra sieved white flour for a lighter upper crust loaf. The rest of us would have had a rougher whole grain.
That's lovely.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's delicious.
After Bess, Stainsby Mill fell into dereliction, but it was rescued during the Industrial Revolution and then restored in the 1970s. Powered by the river, the millstones are still grinding grain into flour today, just as they did for Bess. Miller David Smart is giving me a hands-on tour, starting in the grain store, where visitors aren't normally allowed.
So the first process really is the clean grain going into the hopper above the stones.
And that's the grain in the sack
grain
there.
in the sack.
And it goes...
They are 25 kilogram bags.
Now, is this pure grain?
That's a pure grain, clean and ready to mill.
So that grain goes into the hopper?
That goes into the hopper. You can give us a hand?
Yeah, like that. So, David, what's the next step in the process?
The next step is for me, with this lever here, to take top stone to the bottom stone.
But don't we need water?
Yes, and that will be your process. With that handle across there, you will allow the amount of water in on my instructions.
So this is the most important
It
job?
is, yes.
And you're entrusting it to me?
I am, yes.
Oh, I'll let you down.
Keep going.
How do I
Keep
know
going.
when the
You'll hear-
water's coming in?
You'll hear the water gushing in.
Here it is. Look at the power of that wheel. It's extraordinary.
2,000 gallons of water drive the pair of massive milling stones, and 1 bag of grain takes about an hour to mill.
That is it. That's the final produce.
It's really warm.
Yep.
And it feels like satin. It actually smells of toasted caramel.
Yeah.
It looks good enough to eat on its own.
Right, some people do.
Do they?
You taste it, see what you think.
Actually, do you know, that's not bad. The visitors to Stainsby Mill may not be able to get as hands-on as I have today, but they will be able to buy the flour we produced. I have mine. Just off to do a bit of baking.
Hardwick Hall in Derbyshire was the ultimate country home, and it proclaimed from the rooftops that its owner, Bess, the Countess of Shrewsbury, had arrived.
But no house, regardless of its extravagance, can survive without a little nourishment. And to that end, I'm off to water the floor of the Great High Chamber. You know, whenever I come into the house at home with a watering can, I feel nervous that I'm going to drip and I'm going to be sent out back to my garden. So we're coming in here intentionally to drip.
You are going to water our matting, Alan.
I'm going to... How often do you water your matting?
About once a week when we're open to the public.
Why do we have to water it?
To keep it flexible, we have over 150,000 visitors and they wear it away, so
it dries out?
It helps us preserve it for much, much longer.
OK, come on then. My wife would kill me for doing this at home. Well, an amazing pastime, isn't it, really? Was this something that Bess would have done, Nigel?
Bess wouldn't have done, no, because there wasn't the hundreds of thousands of visitors that in Bess's time, but you would have had matting like this on the floor. You would have woven herbs into it, so as you walked along
Fragrance coming up.
you would have crushed the herbs and the fragrance would have come out, yes.
So it's rush matting, and this would have been common in sort of posh households.
Posh houses only, yes.
And turn. It's a lovely job, isn't it? So only the better houses then, the lesser ones would have just had straw.
Bit of straw down.
Straw strewn on the floor. Amazing, isn't it? I love the smell of it. It's got a rich, fruity smell.
With rush matting in 5 other rooms, it takes a team of 4 an hour and a half every week
Have we missed a bit?
to water what's under their feet.
And turn. Don't know about you, but I'll be awfully glad when they've invented lino. Do we get a tea break?
Bess paid for quality, but as a shrewd businesswoman, she could afford it. Much of her wealth came from sound investments, which her son William continued, buying a copper mine just 30 miles from Hardwick in 1575. It was a canny purchase which brought untold riches to Bess's descendants for over 200 years. Jenny Bond has travelled to Ecton Copper Mine in the Peak District to dig a little deeper.
Looking at these peaceful hills, it's quite hard to imagine how this place was at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution. In fact, Ecton Copper Mine is right here under my feet.
Projects Officer Paul Mortimer is part of the team responsible for looking after the mine's 18th century engine house and the land surrounding it, which has been mined since the Bronze Age.
This is actually the oldest mine-winding engine house in the world. In its day, when it was built in 1788, this was absolutely cutting-edge technology, because inside here was built a Boulton & Watt steam engine, which was the very, very latest type of steam engine, and they produced rotary power for the first time, rather than using a water wheel next to a river.
It must have cost a fortune.
It must have done, but this was one of the brilliant things about Ecton, is that it was owned by the Duke of Devonshire.
The 5th Duke of Devonshire was a direct descendant of Bess, and the engine he installed could raise 40 tons of copper ore every day.
You come here 250 years ago, there would have been 400 people working at the mine. The steam engine would be smoking away. And interestingly, the boiler for the engine produced a lot of waste ash, and they tipped it on the side of the hill just here. And if you look down here at the soil, it's a very, very dry black soil.
Oh, it is, isn't it?
You see that green
Ooh.
on that stone there? That's a trace of copper.
We found copper!
We're rich.
We should open the mine again. That's amazing.
To see the source of this copper,
Hi, Jenny.
I'm here.
Nice to see
I'm
you.
following in the footsteps of the miners of old, led by archaeologist Dr. John Barnett.
Let's go. All right. Welcome to my world.
Thank you very much.
We're walking down the tunnel to the deepest part of Ecton Mine, not accessible to the public.
This arching here was put here in 1774. It's stood ever since, and beautifully made.
I would not like to do my daily commute to work along here.
Oh, goodness, no. Right, we're heading towards the pumping chamber now.
Wow, that was quite a long walk, I must say.
This is what it's all about.
Wow!
None of this is cave. This has all been mined out by miners in the 1700s.
It's very, very beautiful.
Yes. It was very hard work. You came into the mine. You went down up to 1,000 foot of ladders. Then you've got to do a day's work. And then coming up 1,000 foot of ladders.
Yeah, clearly, exhausting work.
At around 400 metres, the mine is as deep as the Empire State Building is high, and it's almost completely flooded.
I just did not expect so much water everywhere.
Before a new hydraulic pump was fitted in 1783, workers had to operate 60 hand pumps continuously to clear the water, allowing the miners to dig even deeper.
So how do they actually get the ore out of the rock?
Well, come over here and I'll show you a shot hole and try and explain.
Okie dokie.
This is a scar from blasting. You see, they've drilled a hole in there.
Right.
In modern mines, you use compressed air and it takes just a few minutes. It takes several hours to drill something like that because it's all done by hand. These are the two tools you'd start with.
Okay.
So you're starting here and you're hitting it.
Right.
And after each hit, you turn it, hit, turn it, hit, and keep going until you've drilled all the way into there. So you then have to fill it with clay and limestone dust, but then put in a fuse. Not like modern fuses. Often it was something like a goose quill, with the feather bits trimmed off, with gunpowder down the centre of it.
Right.
And you light it.
And take cover.
And you take cover as rapidly as possible.
Kaboom! Are there any estimates of how much copper they would have got out?
Thousands of tons. Very valuable compared with lead or zinc.
Right.
Not as valuable as gold, but
Right. But it was
a good price.
It was a real cash cow for the
yes.
Duke of Devonshire.
Ecton Mine was the deepest and most profitable in Britain in the 18th century, making the Dukes of Devonshire the equivalent of millions of pounds today.
You know, it really is the cavernous size of this place that's so astonishing. It's a real piece of history. And when you're here, you realise that the Dukes of Devonshire made a very shrewd move when they invested in Ecton Mine.
Back in the 1590s, business was booming for Bess of Hardwick too. She was rich, powerful, and a regular feature at Elizabeth I's royal court. But her ambition extended to her granddaughter, who she hoped would become queen.
Yet our Bella's story would end in tragedy.
To uncover more about this tale of ambition and intrigue, I'm meeting author and historian Sarah Gristwood in the jaw-dropping Long Gallery.
What a gallery!
I know, it doesn't matter how many times you've been here, you still get that wow moment.
I've seen long galleries, but nothing as
That's
voluminous
right. In
as
terms
this.
of sheer volume, this is as big as it gets. Bess wasn't going to build small.
What were long galleries for?
Well, partly just plain for exercise in wet weather, but also as a kind of picture gallery. I almost said a rogues gallery, but it's a kind of who's who, not just of Bess's family, but of the famous people she knew.
She's not only saying, don't mess with me, look where I've come from, you know, these are my people. Was it built to impress Elizabeth I?
Well, there's 3 reasons Hardwick may have been built as grandly as it was. One of them is to impress the Queen, if ever she came here. In fact, she never came this far north. 2 is for Bess herself. This is local girl made good, because she was just a sort of gentry local girl. But the 3rd reason, of course, is her granddaughter, Arbella.
As the royal child of Charles Stuart, Arbella had a chance of succeeding Queen Elizabeth. With both parents dead, she was under the care of her grandmother Bess.
Doesn't she look regal?
I know, doesn't she just?
Every inch the Queen, to be honest. What was the relationship like between her and her grandmother?
Well, Arbella's parents had died when she was tiny, so Bess really brought her up.
So she was a mum in all but name, then, really?
Well, yes, except that I'm not sure that Bess was really the warm and cuddly mum type, frankly. I think Arbella had huge importance for Bess, partly because of the hopes that she might even be queen.
What was life like for her here?
Well, on the one hand, it was terribly grand, of course. You know, Bess had built this amazing new house, and she was the star here. But on the other hand, over the years, it came to feel a bit like a prison to
Gilded
Arbella.
cage.
Yeah, exactly that. A gilded cage.
Arbella, now in her late 20s, was stuck at Hardwick, facing the life of a frustrated spinster. As a child of royal blood, she needed the Queen's permission to marry, but an advantageous marriage could strengthen Arbella's claim to the crown.
And so there is the Queen, Elizabeth I, right at the end of the gallery where no one could possibly miss her.
Gloriana, in exactly the same pose as Arbella, hand on table, left hand by side, with fan, even to the fan.
I know, exactly. The message is pretty clear, isn't it?
So just how close did Arbella come to being Queen of England?
At one point, very close. All the ambassadors abroad and with spies were writing that it is Arbella they would proclaim queen if Elizabeth were now to die.
So how and when did it all go wrong?
Elizabeth lived too long. All those years, Arbella wasn't getting experience of how the political world worked. She was up here in Hardwick. And small wonder that it came to feel like a prison to her.
Did she try and escape?
Well, she tried, when Elizabeth was dying, to negotiate a marriage for herself, to break free from Hardwick, but it all went terribly wrong.
So what happened? Where did she go?
She was kept here for the next 2 months because the plot was cracked in January and the Queen didn't die until late March. So for weeks, Arbella was up here, she and Bess both growing increasingly frantic. She'd gambled and she'd lost, but in a sense, she was lucky not to have lost more, not to have had something else cut off, because she really could have gone to the block for this.
But Arbella would make the same mistake again. In 1610, 2 years after Bess of Hardwick's death, and with the new King James I on the throne, Arbella recklessly arranged a secret marriage with William Seymour, and without seeking the permission of the monarch.
James was horrified. They were both clapped into prison or, into house arrest. And then finally a daring escape was arranged, a double escape. William, her husband, was in the Tower of London. It was arranged that he'd escape from there disguised as his own barber. Arbella would dress as a man and galloped to the river where a ship was waiting. But it went wrong. They missed each other. Arbella insisted on waiting for William. She was captured on the high seas and brought back to the Tower of London.
And there she ended her days?
She ended her days several years later, having effectively starved herself to death.
King James refused to give Arbella a royal funeral, and her body was placed without ceremony in the vault of her aunt, Mary, Queen of Scots. The late Bess's dream of the crown was now buried with her granddaughter.
The moral of the story is clear. It's better to live in a rather nice house in Derbyshire than to have anything to do with being King or Queen of England.
But someone needed to tell our Bella that.
Arbella's story wasn't unique. Almost 3 decades earlier, Mary, Queen of Scots, had been another victim in this deadly Game of Thrones. Viewed with suspicion because she was a Catholic who had a strong claim to the English crown, Elizabeth I placed her under the custody of Bess and her husband for 15 long years. But Mary secretly communicated her views to the outside world through her embroidered tapestries. Peter Purvis has gone to Oxburgh Hall in Norfolk to pick up the threads of the story.
Kept in captivity, Mary, Queen of Scots obviously had plenty of time on her hands. And now, over 400 years later, I'm lucky enough to see an example of her work here at Oxburgh Hall. Highly symbolic and with Latin phrasing, I'm hoping curator Anna Forrest can explain some of the tapestry's hidden meanings.
Oh gosh. I feel very privileged to be this close to it. So that's Bess's cipher, yes. And that is Mary's.
That's right. And then on the smaller panels, there are examples of Mary's cipher on those as well. So we know that she did those.
So there's a thought that some of these panels were a means of communication for Mary because she had no contact with the outside world.
All of her correspondence would have been censored. So these were an ideal outlet for her to convey her feelings and messages to others. There's some really overt examples just down here on this medallion here.
That's got a Latin script. I can read a little bit of it.
That's right. The message is actually there's a snake in the grass.
Well, that's fairly obvious, isn't it? Yes, that's clever.
Yes.
Whom Mary was calling the snake in the grass isn't clear, but she was right to be paranoid as she was executed for treason in 1587.
Down here, says you mustn't judge anything by its appearance. Don't trust anyone. So she maybe was feeling that she was constantly under surveillance.
During Elizabeth's reign, Oxburgh Hall was owned by the Bedingfeld family. As staunch Catholics, they too risked persecution, so found a way to practice their religion in secret.
How did they avoid serious detection? How did they get away with it?
Well, they would have carried on worshipping as they always had, but there was a chapel in the house that nobody would have known about, and any priest that was holding mass there would have had a means of escape and a place to hide in the event of a search. They had hiding places that we now call priest holes, and there was one at Oxburgh.
So where is it, Anna? Is it actually in the stairs?
No, it's actually underneath what would have been the loo, would you believe?
Oh no, ghastly.
So they've reused what was the chute for the latrine as a means of entry into the priest hole.
Ah, OK. Can we go in?
You can. It is a tight squeeze.
How much notice would they have of a search?
Imagine that the priest may have had just a matter of minutes.
Right. Here we go. Oh, crikey. How long would they maybe have to hide in here?
Well, sometimes the searches that took place went on for several days, so they'd have been down there for all that time, in the dark, listening to people wandering around upstairs.
And what would have happened had they found evidence of a priest being in the building?
The priest would have met a sticky end,
yes.
And the family would have been in extraordinary trouble and would have been fined, jailed, or worse.
A Catholic priest was never discovered at Oxburgh.
Oh.
But the family were fined almost to ruin because they refused to support the Protestant Church of England.
Being strict Catholics, it was a turbulent time for both the Bedingfields and for Oxburgh Hall for almost 3 centuries, until the 1830s, when it became acceptable to be a Catholic again. A struggle the politically shrewd Bess never had at Hardwick Hall.
Set atop a Derbyshire hill, magnificent Hardwick Hall stands proud in all its Elizabethan grandeur. Coated in extravagant glass, it stands as a testament to the remarkable rise of Bess of Hardwick, from her humble beginnings to becoming the second most powerful woman in England.
With her initials and a coat of arms crowning the parapets in 18 places above me, Bess, her story and her Hardwick Hall are as impressive today as they were in the 16th century.